to start to invite my panelist colleagues up onto the stage, and I'll just get the right slide up there. So, Macaulay, if I could ask you to join us first, just over to my right, if that's okay. Sorry, I should have done that. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you. We also have Claudine Ogilvie, CIO at Jetstar. If I could invite you onto stage, Claudine. Thank you. Oh, yeah, that's right. So many people. Welcome, please take a seat. Pontus, can I get you to come back on stage? It's easier up the stairs, probably. Oh, no, you're tall. You've got long legs. Okay, there we go. And we have Richard Curtis as well, thank you. CEO Asia Pacific at Future Brand joining me. Thank you. And last but not least, the other bookend, Timothy Larkos, before I get up to the other end, Director of Operations at PwC. So I'm going to take a seat now, because I've been standing up a lot, but I will turn my seat around a little bit so I can actually see everybody. Okay, so the topic today for our panel is really around insights from the edge. Does culture really eat strategy for breakfast? So we've talked a lot over the last couple of days around culture, around strategy, whether it's digital strategy, whether it's employee experience, human experience, transformation, whatever. But clearly we're all grappling with a lot of different sort of strategic initiatives. And again, as I just said earlier, culture keeps coming up time and time again. And it's not just in terms of making change at the people level. You can probably tell I've been in this industry for quite some time as an analyst. And culture, even things like, think back to server consolidation, data center transformation, culture was always the thing, the biggest roadblock, if you like, in terms of being able to affect change within organizations and what they need to do. So what I'd like to do, just to kind of kick things off, going along the line, to start things off, then we'll get somewhat random, but it's really just to ask each of you in turn, just a quick introduction, but also what does culture and strategy really mean? Are they really linked? Should they be linked? Shouldn't they be linked? So maybe Mukul, I could start with you.
Yeah, sure. So Mukul Agrawal. So my role is the Chief Citizen Experience Officer at the Department of Human Services for the federal government. So look, really interesting topic. My reflection on it is, I think as I've worked in the last sort of 15, 20 years, this topic has become even more and more prevalent in terms of thinking that, coming from a strategy consulting background, I used to always think it is all strategy, which is, having a vision, a plan, narrative with a clear roadmap, and geez, I've done everything. It should be pretty straightforward from here on in. Yeah. Increasingly, and probably now, not surprisingly, I've found actually that's almost like the last step in the process, not the first one, because the culture bit is probably the most profound, which is, how do you understand the mindsets, the ways of working, the history, the context that you're solving for before creating that strategy. And actually the strategy is formed by that, because actually that's what helps you understand the motivations and what's it going to take to either shift it or to align it together. So I think very interlinked. And I think the ordering and how they work together to form over time is even a more important point that I've realized over time.
Okay, so having a degree of empathy to kind of discover why you are where you are at and how you've got there, and kind of addressing those kind of, I guess, entrenched mindsets.
But even to challenge in the right way. I don't think it's a case of understanding the motivations and accepting those. I think strategy is all about challenging and hopefully moving forward. But I think even to do that, even to challenge culture and change culture, you've got to really spend that time understanding that in the first place.
Okay, great. Thank you, Claudine.
Claudine Ogilvie, Chief Information Officer at Jetstar Airways. So culture for me is very much about, it's about what everybody's doing when no one's watching and no one's measuring, and they're going to do it anyway. But it's not only about what you do, it's also about what you don't do and what you walk by. Because as a leader, if you're going to walk by something, implicitly you're saying, well, that's okay.
Okay.
And that trickles down very much across your entire organisation. And I agree that culture impacts all aspects of your strategy and how that comes together. But once you've got sort of that organisational vision, once you've got your goals, I think ultimately when we talk about culture eating strategy for breakfast, where the rubber hits the road is the how you're going to get there. And I think that's when it trips people up the most. It's that's ultimately, I think, where it comes into play.
Okay, so it's kind of that, almost like that concept of, as you plan where you're trying to get to, I know we always talk about the journey, but it's really figuring out what that kind of destination postcard is and what are the steps you need to take to actually get there, and changing course as and when you need to. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pontus?
Culture, I mean, as you said, unstated rules, norms, and values that the organization follows. But it is important to note that the culture has become sticky or prevalent because it's been successful. You know, cultures play a very important role, and cultures over time become sticky only if they're successful, right? And we see this in countless organizations. The role of strategy then is to say, at what point do we need to start changing the culture, and what aspects of culture do we start to change, because the external environment usually changes, technology changes, et cetera. So strategy is that delicate tool. We start to say, we need to evolve our culture. We need to start prioritizing different things. Maybe now it's speed over quality or what have you. But I think we should treat cultural change extremely carefully. I mean, again, no change for the sake of change, and then strategy articulates the case for change, and then we try to change, but often we fail.
Okay, so when you're thinking about cultural change and kind of the way you explained it there, Ponos, it's risky to change cultures or really drive cultures hard, but you need to be doing it from a very inclusive perspective at the end of the day, and not try and change everything, you know, so pick your battles kind of thing at the end of the day?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Richard?
So look, when I think about the last 20 or so years in brand consulting, so everything I've done is kind of through that lens of brand. 2001 was from good to great, BHAGs, every organization going had values, corporate values, and things were quite separate and quite distinct, and consequently silos developed, and we're now at a place where organizations are much more systemic, if you like. And there was a quote this morning from Atlassian talking about TransferWise, and the chief exec saying the product that we make is the outcome of the people we hire and the decisions they make. And we've almost come to the point where kind of culture as a strategy. And when you think about the values of an organization and the ways in which they're articulated in some of those successful, very contemporary organizations, that culture is really the strategy for the organization, in terms of the ways in which they enable their people to get done whatever those jobs are that need to get done. So I think over time, they've become much more closely aligned. And I think where organizations struggle is where there's a gap between the two. And I think it's in the gap between the two that I suppose this panel discussion very much exists.
All right, so kind of stop thinking about culture and strategy as two very distinctly different things, but how they actually are much more closely aligned, or how aligned they should be with each other.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, interesting point. Tim?
Best part about this is I'm at the end of the queue, so I've actually got all the answers I need from some of the brightest
I
people.
will change that very soon, okay?
I think it's true about this whole session, because we're at the end of the 2 days. If you've been listening carefully enough, there's just a whole bunch of stuff you can quote.
Exactly.
All the notes are done.
Exactly.
I actually have a very different view to some of the panel. So I tend to think about culture and strategy as one in some respects. And I like to draw analogies to some of these things. So when I think about culture and strategy, I think about it in the construct of what I refer to as a digital tree. And the strategy being the tree. So that is, how do you want your organisation to look? How many branches, how many leaves? How do you want it to grow, and how do you want it to foster into something great? And the culture for me is actually how you get that tree to grow in the manner and the tools that you use in order to drive that strategy. So you'll need pruning shears, you'll need things to clip, you'll need the right fertiliser, you'll need the right amount of water. Fundamentally, all of that goes to how well your strategy will grow and achieve what it's trying to achieve. So I think the two go hand in hand, and I don't think you can have a really fabulous looking tree with all of the strategy and all of the branches and all of the things that you want it to have unless you have all the right tools and things to help it grow.
But when you really can't shift culture, then the pruning shears get bigger, right?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Okay, we can have questions from the audience, please, as well. There's the orange squeezy microphone will be thrown around. So if anyone's got questions, please just put your hand up and we can take things as we go along. I want to just shift gears a little bit. Oh, got one? Oh, okay, there we go. Thank you, Ines.
Deming, there's this quote that a bad system will beat a good person every time, right? And my personal belief is that culture may be the strategy for breakfast, but structure doesn't. That structure, if we have the wrong structure and if we create this lovely culture, we are asking people to engage in heroics, right? So I would love for you guys to discuss it.
Yeah, who wants to take a stab at that one? Tim? I told you you wouldn't get away with it.
Walked into that one. Look, I think to your point around structure, it is very important for an organisation to have the right structure in place in order to deliver what it's fundamentally trying to deliver. But like most things in organisations, there's no one kind of... So if you get the structure right, that doesn't actually give you everything you need, right? Because the people need to be right, the tools that they're using need to be right. So I think structure serves as a great foundation, if you will, in terms of trying to get the right levels that you're trying to drive. But fundamentally, the add-ons and the things that I'm sure we'll talk about today in terms of what you use to support is actually a really key element. I've spoken with buckets of organisations who have great leadership teams, and it's not actually the structure that's letting them down, it's the tools, it's the technology, it's the people, it's the contractors, it's the providers. Those are the things that actually hold them back from driving, not the structure. So.
Okay, yeah.
And just to build on that, I think the question is the business model, because obviously that encapsulates structures, processes, profit formulas, et cetera. And so I always ask the question, are we working within an existing business model? And if not, how radically are we changing it? Because then you get to have a more comprehensive discussion. But there's no doubt that structure is important, but then you get into, how do you measure people? How do you evaluate people? Even how you hire people? Those things might have to change as you start to evolve the business model. So.
Well, what about from your point of view? I'm thinking that on the main comment there, sort of bad systems and processes will beat or even break good people at the end of the day. What's your sense on that in terms of perhaps not necessarily ways we can overcome that, but what are some of the challenges you would see with things?
Yeah, look, I think it's definitely true. I mean, it stops us so many times, whether it's old ways of doing things or lots of old thinking in terms of we have to follow a rigid process. There's no doubt about it. I think the new in thing at the moment that makes a lot of sense to me is ultimately anything can be resolved if you get everyone in a room, multidisciplinary team, and we work it out. So I think that's a new norm and concept of, well, actually, even with the ultimate structure, which might have had a lot of thinking put into it, you still have this issue that we have silos of some sort. So ultimately, it just comes down to everyone getting in a room, having an open discussion, and resolving it. So for me, it does still come back to that. Even that concept is very cultural. That actually, what are we here to do? Are we clear on what everyone is thinking before we sort of decide that there is a conflict or an issue here, and then let's work through it. And once again, whether it's vertical, horizontal, let's get the right people to have the discussion with.
Okay, yeah, I mean, we've talked a bit over the last couple of days about the whole concept about, co-create, for example. So it's that kind of concept, isn't it, really? So get people together to actually figure out what the problems are and how we can actually overcome them, rather than trying to drive down a solution without actually addressing all the various stakeholders. Yeah, okay, absolutely. Claudia, I'd be interested in your perspectives, because obviously you're CEO of a modern airline, but obviously in a very heavily regulated industry with obviously a lot of process involved. So from your point of view, what sort of challenges do you kind of face, and what ideas would you have to overcome that kind of process and systems basically sort of breaking good people at the end of the day, potentially? Yeah.
So yes, Jetstar's quite a young airline.
Yeah.
We're about 15 years old, and we have really strong culture, which is fantastic. It's played in our favour very much. And I think because we've come from that startup airline 15 years ago, we've managed to keep a lot of that. And a lot of those traits, the values, those strong cultural traits, which has kept us so strong for so long, also have a bit of a dark side.
Okay.
And a great example is we're lean. We're a low-cost carrier. We're also very much can-do. And everyone jumps in and everyone helps out, and that's awesome. And we want to keep that, but it has to evolve. So we want to keep being low-cost. It's fundamental to our business model. And we want people to be can-do. We want them to jump in. But over the dark side, how that's translated, as we've gotten bigger as an organisation, it's also meant a blurring of the lines between responsibilities and accountabilities over time. And that's okay if you've got one little tiny team and we're all working together, that's great. But when you start having a much, much larger structures and multiple teams, and all of a sudden there's this big blurring because everyone's just getting stuck in there, that causes problems. It's interesting to watch some of your stats around some of the barriers to collaboration. Up the top, you had conflicting goals and KPIs. So this fantastic cultural trait that we have and we want to keep, you have to keep curating it as I think your organisation grows and matures as well. So that's something that we've been looking at. Another example, I think, we have a really great sense of, ownership and accountability, and that's fantastic, and we want everyone to get sort of stuck in there. But at the same time, you can't, this great sense of caring and ownership and accountability, you've got to make sure that also translates into, bringing people in and questioning things, and this sense of ownership, which was great when you're a tiny little organisation, it has to translate into, but I own it with other people as well.
Okay, so sorry, so it's kind of, it's sort of like accountable empowerment, but not making accountability a bad thing, because I think historically accountability is, well, you've done something wrong, so you're accountable. It's more about, what is the result from this, what's good about it, what's bad about that kind of thing. So really empowering people with accountability. Yeah.
And I mean, culture, like I said, I think there's a light and a dark to almost every cultural trait. And that means something different and translates differently in different organisations, and depending where you are in that maturity curve as well. And I think you just need to be conscious. I think you need to be switched on to where your company is at, and it's never set and forget. Even though we want to keep those same cultural traits, like you say, it's very dangerous changing a culture, and we don't really want to change it. But you do need to pay attention to it and make sure that it's evolving in the right way.
Okay, that makes sense. Pontus, I think you were going to make a point.
Just a quick comment on that, because I think it's such an important point. Your capabilities are also your disadvantages. And you have to keep a close eye on when can you tolerate them and when do you need to change them. And there's also, you don't want to change just because they are important. They actually make the company work. But at certain points in time, I come back to our friends in the retail business. They had certain KPIs, metrics, footfall into the stores, et cetera. And those were part of their culture. They were unwilling to change, and that's all she wrote. So that's why this leadership and this digital transformation is so tough, that you gotta let go things which drive huge amounts of value. You gotta leave cherished cultural pieces behind and be willing to walk to something different that's uncertain. That's why it's really tough. It's better if you don't have to do it, I think.
That's right. Richard, I mean, obviously with CEO Future Brand, you listen to this in terms of embedded sort of cultures and mindsets, when an organisation you're working with may well be trying to really transform to something new and something different. You must come across this all the time, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
in short.
Yep.
And we have the advantage of looking inside lots of different organisations of all different shapes and sizes. As I was listening to you talk, Claudine, I was just thinking about the challenges that you have, or organisations that are heavy on customer service have in terms of front office versus middle and back, and how do you get an entire organisation to understand from a cultural perspective how they might deliver for the customer, where for some people the customer might feel a long way away. And some really interesting studies in the HBR around let's not do employee engagement or kind of cultural activities with front office. They already get it, and you just actually frustrate them more. You need to focus on middle and back to understand how they fit within the process. And as you think about large organisations and how do you break them down into manageable sizes, if you like, really understanding pivotal populations. Insofar as supermarkets are a good example of this. You might have 100 or so thousand people in a supermarket, very difficult to engage with that many people. But as soon as you realise that a pivotal population is the store manager, and if you have a great store manager, good clean store, good clean working environment, you can reach that population relatively easily in terms of there being 6, 7, 8, 900 people, versus 100,000. And so looking for those points within any organisation. And I think classically, good people in bad organisations turn bad. And I was actually reflecting on this in one of the conversations earlier about, you hear in this context about shadow IT and legacy IT, legacy systems. I do wonder if you can apply the same thinking to people, insofar as legacy people who might have old ways of working and won't change, or shadow people, who are the people that you might go to get something done because the organisation is broken or disjointed or dysfunctional in some way, and how organisations might handle that insofar as rebuilding or rebonding themselves. So yes, lots of different dynamics in terms of how do you actually get an organisation to do the thing that it's meant to do, which is come together to do something collectively that you can achieve individually, I think is the Packard quote.
So we need to think about kind of the whole legacy side of things. We then talk about we need to invest in transformational IT to reduce our reliance on legacy. So we need to be investing in transformational mindsets to reduce legacy mindsets, right?
Well, I think there's a fair bit of that going on. You know, it's easy to change the people and change the people, and I think that will continue, especially with automation, AI, et cetera, and people needing to learn new jobs in a new world. So I think it'll only become more keenly felt.
Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense. Remember yes, we have a question down here. Thank you. Thank you, Bridget.
I've just been reflecting, something that's come up over the last couple of days around the lack of trust perhaps between team members and people actually in the workforce. And I was thinking about, because I think there's always a huge emphasis on leaders to upskill, keep current, work on their best behaviours to drive the right sort of positive culture within an organisation. But I was quite alarmed by how many people, given that we've got a pretty good group of people here as well, have a lot of distrust within their teams. Do any of you leaders have any insights on how you, besides out of books, do you know what I mean? Do you have any sort of interesting concepts around how you can make your team trust each other more?
Tips from the coalface, guys, in terms of...
I'll pick up on something that Pontus talked about, and I'm not sure if he meant it exactly like this, but we'll see how we go, which is around shared language. And you might have meant that more strategically. I would mean that incredibly literally. I think language is an incredibly powerful thing in terms of the words that you use and the kinds of responses that evokes. So, language is behavioural. If I start shouting and swearing, you'll behave in one way. If I start talking more kind of academic discourse, you'll kind of respond in another. And I think the power of language to help transform or change or evolve or affect an organisation is massive. Like I always joke in our world, in branding, that the two most popular words in branding are lorem ipsum. And it just seems to be that so many organisations have such corporatised language that becomes rendered meaningless effectively. And I think language becomes a really powerful thing for how you can actually have that shared understanding, whether it's what do we mean by disruption or transformation, to just how do we talk to one another. And if you don't even have the basics of a shared language, you may as well be kind of having Spaniards talking to Italians in their native tongue, and just no one understands what the other's talking about. So language would be my massive tip.
Mm-hmm. I'll say two quick builds on that. First, I very much agree with what you said. I think the other things that leaders need to get much better at is essentially storytelling or creating a narrative and a vision. That's nothing new, but certainly I think it's much more important in a world which is changing quite rapidly. And the second point is values. I think fundamentally folks who do this, they need to be very much values-led, and values hopefully are good values. But here, you need things like humility, you need things like collaboration, you need low hierarchy, et cetera. DBS, quick story, they said their meetings weren't very productive, so they instituted Mojo. Meeting owner, joyful observer. It doesn't matter who's in the meeting, CEO included, the meeting owner has to make sure everyone gets share of voice, all the things are organized appropriately, and the joyful observer then kind of says, have we achieved our objectives, kind of a little bit of a detached, but CEO modeled that behavior of saying, how did the meeting go? Please observe, was I constructive, et cetera, et cetera. So values and then telling the narrative, hugely important.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, sorry, Claudia.
I was just sort of building on the topic of trust. I think trust is very much a very simple concept. It's doing what you say you will do. And I think the concept is so simple. Sometimes it's easy to forget how difficult it can be to implement, because sometimes it means being really brave. I spoke about earlier about it's as much about what you don't do and what you don't say, as well as what you do. So if you walk past something, it's a difficult situation, difficult person, whatever you want, if you're not calling that out, and somebody sees you not call that out, and you've been talking the talk, but you're not walking the walk, and you're not calling out bad behaviour, you lose trust like that. Same thing for an organisation. You think about organisations in general. Customers, sometimes it's as basic as, I just want you to deliver my product. It's simple, right? Yeah. But in practice, it's not. I think at a low-cost carrier, we're not going to give you the bells and the whistles that a lot of the full service carriers will give you, but you expect our planes to be on time. You expect us to get from A to B without any hassles, and in practice, that could be bloody hard, particularly when you're fighting against the weather and the other delays, and some things are a little bit out of our control, some things are. But really, in terms of building customer trust, it's the same thing for your employees. You just want to deliver what you say you would deliver. And I think that that's really hard in a lot of situations, and it takes a lot of bravery, and it's got to start from the top.
So sometimes it's a lot easier to say it than actually deliver on it at the end of the day. That's
Yeah.
right, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, cool, yeah.
Oh, look, my only insight adding to all of that, I mean, definitely it's symbolism, it's walking the walk. I think I've been to many cultures where, or inherited teams where there's a lot of distrust for many reasons, history, contractor versus permanent. I guess everyone's worried about who's going to get the next big project, or am I going to be reporting to somebody else? What's going on here? And for me, I think it's understanding that context, but then very quickly, you don't want to leave months waiting, letting that play out. It's orchestrated interventions. It's really, having that open dialogue, but orchestrating, open dialogue as much as possible as the leader, asking pointed questions, seeing how the room's playing out and keep building on that, and doing clusters sometimes, maybe not everyone together, because that's overwhelming for people. So I think, my learning is you've got to really think about what's going on here. It's almost like a bit of a chess game just to understand the environment and then to work through each one using all the techniques to bring everyone on that journey. And I think for me, one of the big ones we always forget to do is the recognition when something does go well. So if someone has spoken up, to actually follow up with them and tell them, that was good, thanks for speaking up and saying it because you were the first one. So I think we forget that sometimes, and just doing that encourages that person to do it 3 times more, and then another 5 people. So I think that ripple effect also happens when someone get that reinforcement exercise going. So.
Okay, no, good point. Tim, I just want to pick up a little bit on this as well. When we think about these kind of, goals between employees and between the business and culture and strategy and so on, what do you think we need to be doing in terms of not necessarily rewarding employees, but obviously we don't have common goals across every employee, right? We have, depending on your role, depending on your level, you kind of got different expectations. How can we kind of have this common approach, to kind of aligning sort of, goals and objectives, if you like, between the business and the employees, when typically employees have, very different sets of personal objectives? Any thoughts on that?
Yes. So, as you probably all appreciate, PwC's 300,000 people globally. So,
that's why I asked
keeping culture aligned is an incredibly tricky ask because you've got very different countries, the way that they operate, very different values. And so trying to keep a unified approach to that education process is actually quite difficult. So one of the things that we actually introduced at PwC to help address that is this construct of digital IQ. And that is that everyone has a set base for what effectively their digital IQ is. And so what we have in our organisation, when we think about it in the construct of people, clients and firm, the varying number of people that we have across our global entities have varying levels of success. You might have an auditor who's been doing it for 30 years versus a graduate who's been at uni for 5 years, and so their skill levels are entirely different. And so one of the things I think in order to address that disparity is fundamentally understanding what is the baseline for those individuals and trying to find a unified view for that baseline, and then help fill those gaps and create that upskilling opportunity. So one of the things that we put a very high emphasis on at PwC is making sure that our staff go through an exercise of baselining what their digital IQ is, and then help proactively reinforce that with learning and training exercises. I think the other thing, just coming back to Bridget's point around trust, is one of the challenges you have with that, particularly in a workforce that has been doing the same thing for a long time and they don't want to change. You really need to look at why they don't trust going into that.
Right.
And in my experience, that's predominantly been driven by a culture of lack of vulnerability. So you need to foster an environment in which people can be vulnerable and people can put their hand up and say, actually, hey, I don't know how to use Excel and I've never used it before and I've been stamping a receipt for 50 years and that's worked just fine for me. Because unless they feel comfortable in that vulnerable position, their likelihood of wanting to engage is probably going to be exceptionally limited, and as a result, their likelihood of increasing digital IQ will be limited.
Okay, that's a really good point, actually, kind of doing that kind of baseline modelling, if you like, or exercise, I think obviously is really quite critical, because you're right, because I think a lot of people, even not necessarily entrenched people, but new people as well, they are, if you like, somewhat reticent to admit what they cannot do. If they think the answer should be yes, I can do that, but encouraging that and helping people develop and grow, I think is really important.
That point around digital IQ is an interesting one. So certainly what we've come across in a lot of the big banks is essentially, it's just amazing how many manual workarounds there are in big banks. What you do on an app, there's probably someone out in Parramatta manually processing it. And so you end up with these banks, and this happens with a couple of the big four, whereby you have one part of the organisation taking moonshots, wanting to change the world and thinking about next generation technology. And the other part, within the same kind of business unit, the other end of the spectrum, where it's like, I've got a pile of paper I need to get through, and I'm just thinking about the next day. And if you talk to me about next generation, I'm going to punch you in the face.
Yeah.
And how do you create a culture that does straddle that? And so I think the digital IQ is kind of a good way of level setting, if you like, as opposed to just the opposite end of the spectrum. And it makes it very hard, given that technology is not evenly distributed through many of these organisations.
I think that so I'd agree. I think the challenge is you need to be very minded, though, of people's perceptions. To the extent you go through an exercise and you measure your digital IQ, if you imagine for a moment that the range of that IQ is somewhere between 100 and 400 for the sake of the scoring exercise, if you're someone who's just gone through that exercise and you've scored at 101, your willingness to kind of openly share that and be vulnerable when you're surrounded by people who are sitting in kind of 300-400 is a very scary exercise for someone, because what you don't want to do is put yourself into a category where you feel like you're the outcast, you're the one, everyone else is, the firm average is 350 and you're sitting at 100. What does that do to that individual who's sitting at 100? And so there is a lot of emphasis around making sure that those people are supported through that journey. Because more often than not, to be honest with you, the ones that started very low and ended up very high are actually the bigger disruptors in the firm longer term.
Okay, interesting point. Claudine, you were going to make a comment?
Yeah, well, I was just actually building on this concept of, which I think is really relevant to a lot of the topics that we've been talking about here today over the past couple of days, of that safely learning, that idea of safely learning and the idea of failing. You don't really fail, you learn, and the only real failure is not learning at the end of the day. And I genuinely believe that. But again, and I think in how that translates culturally, how do you make that safe? How do you create a safe culture? And I think often it's through, top down. You need showing vulnerability, showing that your leaders are learning, or that some of your leaders have put their hands up and said, you know what, I actually don't know how to do Power BI. I don't know how to do Power BI. I wouldn't know how to build a report, and I'm one of the senior leaders and I'm going to sign up for that, and doing that really openly. But also at a more granular level, how each of those leaders, I think, work in with their teams and make that okay. When somebody fails in your team, is that you just didn't meet your KPI, or is it okay? Okay, so you didn't make it. So what were your learnings? And let's talk about that, and then celebrate learnings, and then celebrate about how they're going to, prop them up. Actually, make it something a really good thing, that they're going to start again with these amazing learnings. And I don't think very many organisations do that very well. I don't think they do it intuitively or naturally, and I think that's something we as leaders probably need to spend a lot more time doing. But not just as leaders, but also how do we help our leaders do that as well and trickle down, because I think that's when it's really powerful.
And that's exactly why I made most of our senior partners post their scores initially. Because if you lead from a top-down perspective, if you have the managing partners and the most senior of executives in the firm say that they got 100 and something, guess what? People feel a lot more comfortable to say that they got 100 and something. So.
It's interesting that there's a speaker called Ken Robertson who does a great TED talk around when we talk about failing fast and all that kind of stuff, and celebrating success and so on. And the fact that, and when we think about cultures within organisations, when we went to school, for example, like my age, failure's a really bad thing, and it was really, it was kind of frowned on. You had to succeed, you couldn't fail. So you have, I think, a lot of entrenched mindsets in the workforce, which is driving this culture where it's bad to fail. Whereas now, I think, as younger people are coming through, it's not sort of, I wouldn't say it's totally encouraged, but it's acceptable that as long as you learn from those failures and move on from that, that's not a bad thing to do. So I think that's driving a lot of the cultural stuff, Pontus.
One quick comment on that. I agree with everything that's been said, but to be fair, learning does cost money. There's actually a cost. If you learn at scale in a large organization, it is true that it's ineffective and all that often. And the reality is that most business models don't accommodate learning. Now, a business model that accommodates learning is 3M. I mean, if you visit their innovation center in Singapore or elsewhere, you'll see they spend 100 and only 20 get launched if one takes aggregate numbers. But their business model has built in that cost of learning. Now, most business models have not built in the cost of learning. So if people start learning at scale, it's going to be an expensive exercise if the business model. So you also have to learn in the appropriate scale. So what kind of you don't want to learn about, aircraft maintenance probably. You don't want to experiment too much, right? There are certain things you don't want to learn on. You execute to a standard. And then there are other areas where you might want to learn. And that's why, again, it's the common language and in which parts of the business model, which parts are you tweaking or transforming? It's an important discussion because it does cost money. And in the end of the day, business leaders are within their rights to say, are we, a sustainable enterprise if we keep doing this at scale?
Yeah. So we want you to learn and develop. We haven't necessarily got the budget to do it.
Appropriately.
That's right.
Appropriately.
Exactly. Any questions from the audience out there, from delegates? Hands up, and we'll throw the mic around. No. Okay. What I'm going to ask now is just.
Was there one?
There's one. Oh, there we are. Thank you. Thank you, Anthony.
We are going through a bit of a culture transformation process in Gumtree as well, and what was interesting to me is we talk a lot about the cultures that we already have that we want to get rid of, but do any of you in your organizations have a target culture that you're working towards, and how do you bring in those new behaviors into an organization?
Who wants to take a stab at that one?
9 seconds.
No, we got plenty of time.
I don't think we have a target culture. So we certainly have values, like corporate values. They're, like I said, are very, very strong, and they have translated into our culture. And I think culture for any organisation is very difficult to define, but values are less difficult. And I think for us, it's how those values translate into the everyday. For us is our way of I think, curating, I think that culture. And like I said, for us, it's meant we want to keep those same values, but we want them to evolve with the organisation. And being lean and being can-do, we want to keep that. But because our organisation has gone from this to that in 15 years, that's means so much change for so many people, and our culture, the way we work, what we do has to change with it, but you can keep those values. So I think there are constants, and there are things that will change and evolve with the organisation. And how do you change it, or how do you evolve that? For us, it's like I said, for me, it's what you do. It's every day, the stuff that, and it's working when people do that when no one's looking, when no one's measuring it and they're doing it anyway. That's when you've succeeded in that space.
Yeah.
If you want to use a blunter tool, you could just start changing how you remunerate people or what you measure. So how you give out the annual bonus or what kind of people you promote, et cetera. That is a tool to change behaviors. Who you hire is a tool to change behaviors and ultimately culture. But certainly the most kind of the bluntest tool, but that has a lot of impact and has to be used very carefully, is we're no longer going to measure this, we're going to measure this, and we're going to promote people who do this well. And then watch what happens. Could be catastrophic. But I mean, if you do that well and carefully, it actually leads to a different type of organization.
Okay.
So I think what Claudine mentioned, I think echoes what Victoria from Event spoke about yesterday morning, in terms of, in their case, values jams or culture jams. And it's less so what the word is and more what it means to people and therefore what they do. And I think that can often align people because they get a shared understanding of what the expectations are, and they hear from their colleagues around the organisation, well, what might that mean, as opposed to just relying on the dictionary definition term, and you get into role modelling and so forth. And then I think the other aspect building on what Pontus was just saying, is, you can't change people. Something that was said to me a long time ago is you can't change people, you change the environment and then they respond differently. And that might be KPIs, it might be where they're located, it might be other people you bring into the team, but it's kind of understanding those environmental factors. And I don't just mean the physical environment, but kind of those dynamics in and around a team. Focus on changing those in order to then drive a different set of responses.
Great. Let's just have a, I guess before we wrap up, just a quick kind of lightning round in terms of each of you. What's your key sort of 10, 20-second takeaway here? Michael, starting with you.
Look, at the end of the day, I think culture is difficult. It's got many components. At the end of the day, I think that last sort of conversation for me has a really good go at how to go about it, which is what's the values, what's the deep DNA that you are aspiring to, and then really it's lots of shifts and movements towards that and orienting towards that. I think the values can stay constant. Everything else will keep moving, and I think for me that's the key. How do you keep to one direction?
Okay, Tim, I'm going to mix it up here, you see. So there you go. what's your number one takeaway?
My number one takeaway would probably be just to consider what your tree looks like and focus on growing it as best you can with the tools that you have around you. That's probably what.
Okay, good one. Pontus?
So I think what's happening, what needs to happen, create a narrative that's based on robust analysis, and then start to transform the organization. And it's simplification and storytelling based on values, if one wants to be simplistic about it.
All right, simplification, storytelling. Richard?
It would be people. We're not going away, so we'd better work out how to work with each other better.
Good point, Claudine.
Be brave, walk the talk. If it's not right, you change it, and you start emulating that change and expecting exactly the same from all your leaders and your peers and colleagues.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. Please join me in thanking our panellists.